Imagine you're flipping through the news on a chilly February evening in 2025, and bam, a headline hits you like a freight train. The US economy faces its biggest recession warning yet. What if I told you that right now? As we speak, the ground beneath America's economic might is starting to crack. Could the land of opportunity, the powerhouse that's driven global growth for decades, be on the brink of a collapse nobody saw coming? Stick with me because this isn't just some doom and gloom guess. It's a story unfolding in real time, and we're about to peel back the layers. Let's take a step back to see how we got here. Cast your mind to the early 20th century, when the US was flexing its industrial muscles. Factories churning out steel, cars rolling off assembly lines, the stock market climbing like it had no ceiling. Until 1929, when the party crashed hard. The Great Depression wasn't just a blip. It was a wake-up call. Unemployment soared to 25%. Banks folded like cheap lawn chairs. And then came 1930's Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. Lawmakers thought jacking up duties on over 20,000 imports would save American jobs. Sounds good on paper, right? But it was like tossing gasoline on a fire. Other countries slapped tariffs. Right back. Global trade tanked 65% in 3 years. And the US economy didn't just stumble. It face-planted. Fast forward to the post-World War II. Glow. America rises from the ashes as the world's economic superhero. 1947 rolls in, and the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT, starts stitching the globe back together. Tariffs drop, trade booms, and by 1995, the World Trade Organization takes the reins. Suddenly, the US is importing $3.2 trillion worth of goods by 2022. China's sending gadgets. Canada's shipping, oil. Mexico's cranking out car parts. It's a beautiful, interconnected machine until someone decides to kick it. Enter Donald Trump, 2018. First term, big promises. He's all about fair trade. 25% tariffs on steel, 10% on aluminum, aimed square at China. Beijing doesn't flinch. They hit back with duties on US soybeans, cars, pork. Farmers lose $27 billion. Taxpayers cough up $61 billion in bailouts, and the trade deficit just yawns. Now jump to today. February 2025, Trump's back, and he's swinging harder. February 4th, he drops a 10% tariff on all Chinese imports. China retaliates fast, smacking $14 billion of US goods with 10 to 15% duties. Coal, LNG, crude oil, farm gear. It's a gut punch. Then February 10th, he goes nuclear. 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports. No exceptions. Canada, Mexico, Brazil. They're all in the crosshairs. Why? He says it's about jobs. Stopping China's cheap steel flood. Last year, China pumped out 1.01 billion tons of steel, way more than it needs. Drowning global markets. Canada sends 89% of its steel, 13 million tons, to the US. Mexico's at 4 million tons. Brazil's pitching in too. This isn't just trade. It's the lifeblood of North American manufacturing. Think cars. 202 billion in vehicles and parts zipped across borders in 2024. Those tariffs could spike costs 8 and 12%, slow production, and who's stuck with the bill? You, me, the guy buying a pickup in Tulsa. Canada's furious. Justin Trudeau's on the air, calling it unacceptable, vowing dollar-for-dollar retaliation. Mexico's Marcelo Ebrard says it's unfair. The EU's Ursula von der Leyen warns of proportionate countermeasures. Visualize this. A steel plant in Ohio might crank up output, but an auto factory in Michigan starts shedding workers. Meanwhile, China's not just trading blows. They're rewriting the game. February 4th, they choke off 5 rare metals. Tungsten, molybdenum, indium. Crucial for chips, jets, solar, panels. China's got 80% of the world's rare earths, and they're flexing hard. US tech firms like Intel are panicking. Defense giants like Lockheed are scrambling. Energy's next. China took 5% of its LNG, 2% of its oil from the US last year. Small potatoes, sure. But now they're pivoting. Canada's Trans Mountain Pipeline's pumping 500,000 barrels a day to China, up 30% from 2023. Russia's tossing discounted crude into the pot, $10 below Brent. Iran's matching it. US oil exports might dip for the first time since 2020. Gulf Coast ports could clog with unsold barrels, while Europe snags cheap. West Texas Intermediate. It's a global shuffle, and America's losing cards. Coal's in the mix too. China's the world's top importer. US ranks 4th. Trump's tariffs hit. China slaps 15% on US coal. Exports to China already fell 20% in 2024. And now this. US miners pivot to India, Japan, South Korea. But shipping costs are up 20%. China's buying from Australia, Canada instead. US coal jobs in West Virginia, teetering. So what's Trump's angle? Reciprocal tariffs. If you tax us, we tax you. He's meeting India's Narendra Modi this week. India's 9.5% tariff on US goods versus America's 3% on them. Enormously high. Trump says India's dangling cuts on electronics, medical gear. Deal or duel? Who knows? But February 13th, he's still swinging. Orders agencies to eye tariffs on pharma, oil, semiconductors, maybe the EU. Inflation's climbing, 2.7% in January. Jobs added just 143,000 last month, weakest since 2023. Goldman Sachs says this could slice 0.4% off GDP. Brookings ups it to 1% if retaliation kicks in. Consumers feeling it. Car prices creeping up. Tech getting pricier. So why's he doubling down? Some say it's a chess move. Pause tariffs on Canada and Mexico for 30 days. Squeeze them on fentanyl. Border talks. Others see a crapshoot. Imagine an Iowa farmer watching soybean prices crater again. A California coder sweating her job. A Texas driver cursing $4 gas. It's not abstract. It's real, and the world's got eyes on it. EU's trade chief calls it counterproductive. Reuters pegs Canada's oil shift to China as a trade map redraw. Brookings says a $1 trillion hit by 2034. So what's America betting here? Let's keep peeling this onion because the layers are just getting started. The US economy's staring down a barrel of warning signs. Tariffs are flying, and the world's pushing back. Now let's dig into the meat of this beast, because the numbers and moves happening right now are wild, and they're hitting where it hurts. First off, China's not messing around. Their retaliation to Trump's 10% tariff on all Chinese imports isn't just a slap. It's a calculated $14 billion hammer drop. Imagine this. 167,000 metric tons of US coal. 5.6 million tall barrels of crude oil. 562 million cubic feet of LNG. All slapped with 10-15% duties as of February 4th, 2025. That's straight from the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Coal exports to China were already down 20% in 2024, and now this could tank them further. Meanwhile, U.S. farm equipment exports, think tractors from John Deere, are down 15% since January. China's steel giants just shrug and turn to Canada instead. Speaking of Canada, they're rewriting the playbook. Trans Mountain Pipelines pumping 500,000 barrels of oil a day to China, up 30% from 2023. Bloomberg's got the receipts on that. U.S. crude's getting edged out. Russia's tossing oil into the mix at $10 below Brent crude. Iran's right there too. Analysts say U.S. oil exports could drop 10% this year. Picture Gulf Coast ports drowning in unsold barrels while Europe scoops up cheap West Texas Intermediate. Then there's steel. Trump's 25% tariff on Canada's 13 million tons and Mexico's 4 million tons. It's a body blow. U.S. auto industry's freaking out. $202 billion in cross-border car parts moved in 2024, and now the Center for Automotive Research says costs could jump 8 to 12%. GM's already hinting at price hikes. Ford's muttering about supply chain adjustments. Jobs might not get saved. They might evaporate. Canada's not sitting still. Trudeau's team crunched the numbers. $16.6 billion in U.S. exports to Canada are in their crosshairs. Machinery, plastics, chemicals, they're promising dollar-for-dollar payback. Mexico's joining the fray. $3 billion in U.S. goods on their hit list. Ebrard's eyeing Texas exports. Oil, gas, ag. They're pissed, and they've got leverage. EU's not far behind. Ursula von der Leyen's got $300 billion in U.S. imports on her radar. Aircraft, tech, pharma, Boeing could take a hit. Now, here's the kicker. China's rare earth chokehold. 95% of U.S. imports for those metals come from them. Tungsten, molybdenum, indium. They're in your phone, F-35 jets, solar panels. Those restrictions they slapped on February 4th. Department of Defense says it could stall U.S. semiconductor projects by 18 months. Intel's stock dipped 3% that day. Lockheed's begging Congress for help. Energy markets are a mess. U.S. LNG to China was 3% of exports last year. Growing fast. Now China's eyeing Qatar, Australia. Coal's bleeding too. China took 11 million tons from the U.S. in 2023. 15% tariff hits. And that's fading. India's buying some, but shipping costs are up 20%. West Virginia miners are sweating. Jobs, January's report. 143,000 added, weakest since 2023. Conference Board's leading indicators dropped 1.3% in December. Goldman Sachs says these tariffs could shave 0.4% off GDP. Brookings says 1% if retaliation ramps up. Inflation's at 2.7% now. But Capital Economics warns it could hit 3.5%. Car prices climbing. Tech getting pricier. Consumers are starting to feel the squeeze. But hang on. Here's the twist. You've seen the punches, but you won't believe how this could flip everything upside down. The U.S. economy's taking hits left and right. Tariffs are sparking chaos, and the world's swinging back hard. Let's tie this up with a bang because this isn't just about trade squabbles. It's about who's running the show on the global stage. Start with China. Their $14 billion retaliation and rare earth chokehold isn't random. It's a power play. They've got 80% of the world's supply of those metals. Tungsten, molybdenum, indium, and the U.S. needs them bad. Reuters says a full cutoff could cost $120 billion in lost production. Intel's chips, Lockheed's jets, Tesla's batteries. They're all hanging by a thread. China's betting America caves first. Then there's energy. Canada's pumping 500,000 barrels a day to China via Trans Mountain, up 30% from 2023. That's not just oil shifting. It's a middle finger to decades of U.S. reliance. U.S. energy. Department says North America's $1 trillion energy trade could splinter if Canada and Mexico keep turning east. Russia's tossing crude at $10 below Brent. Iran's matching it. OPEC might cut output, jack up prices. Gas could hit $4 a gallon here by summer. Coal's crumbling too. China's 15% tariff on U.S. coal could shrink exports by 25%. West Virginia jobs? On the chopping block. Now the economy. Goldman Sachs pegs a 0.4% GDP hit from tariffs. But if this escalates, Brookings says 1.2%. That's $1.2 trillion in taxes over a decade. Inflation climbing to 3.5%. Car prices up 10%. Tech up 15%. Detroit layoffs. Silicon Valley stagnation. Here's the jaw-dropper. What if Trump's tariffs aren't the point? China's playing chess while he's playing checkers. Rare earths, oil pivots, steel reroutes. It's a long game. If they lock in Canada, deepen ties with Russia, cozy up to the EU, the US could lose its economic crown. Asia's GDP share hit 35% in 2024. North America's at 27%. This could accelerate that flip. US dollar's king, holding 60% of global reserves. If that slips, borrowing costs skyrocket. Imagine Beijing calling the shots. Canada's oil move. It's a signal. Mexico's $3 billion threat. Another crack. EU's $300 billion counter. Tying up with Canada? They're done waiting. Trump might save 1.5 million steel jobs, but autos employ 10 million. Lose there, and it's lights out. February 2025 stats. Jobs at 143,000, weakest in years. Conference Board says recession odds at 20%. JP Morgan's at 35%. Unemployment could hit 6% if GDP tanks. So here's the twist. Is this Trump's boom going bust? Or a bluff to force better deals? Smoot-Hawley crashed us in the 30s. What's different now? Stronger fundamentals? Maybe. But the world's not the same. China's rising, Canada's shifting, EU's plotting. So what's the call? Can America dodge this bullet? Or are we watching the start of a seismic shift where the US isn't the big dog anymore? Hit me with your take because this story's nowhere near done. While the US is scrambling to dodge these economic punches, the ripple effects are hitting places you wouldn't expect. Let's zoom in on the heartland. Iowa's soybean farmers are staring at another gut punch. China's 10 to 15% duties on US ag exports mean demand's drying up. Last year, they bought $14 billion worth of US soybeans. But with these tariffs, Bloomberg says that could drop 30% in 2025. Farmers are already underwater from 2018's trade war. $27 billion in losses back then. And now this. Barns are quiet. Equipment sitting idle. Over in Texas, oil rigs might slow down. Those 5.6 million barrels of crude China's taxing, that's a chunk of Gulf Coast output. EIA says U.S. oil exports could fall 10%. And if Canada's 500,000 barrels a day keep flowing to China, Texas drillers might cut shifts. Jobs there hang in the balance. Meanwhile, Michigan's auto workers are biting nails. Those 13 million tons of Canadian steel and 4 million from Mexico, they're in every car rolling off the line. Center for Automotive Research says an 8 and 12% cost spike could mean thousands of layoffs. GM and Ford are whispering about passing costs to buyers. Imagine a family in Ohio skipping that. New truck because it's $5,000 pricier. Then there's California. Techs sweating. China's rare earth restrictions could delay chip production 18 months. Intel's got fabs on hold. Tesla's battery timelines are slipping. Venture capital's jittery. Startups might fold. So what's the damage? Conference Board's leading indicators are down 1.3%, signaling trouble. JP Morgan's recession odds jumped to 35% this month. Unemployment's at 3.8% now, but 6% isn't crazy if this unravels. Goldman Sachs says GDP's taking a 0.4% hit. But pile on retaliation, and Brookings' 1.2% looks real. $1.2 trillion in taxes over 10 years. That's $3,600 per household, per year. Inflation's creeping, 2.7% in January, headed for 3.5%. Gas at $4, groceries up, rent tighter. But here's where it flips global. China's not just hitting back. They're building a new order. Those rare earths? They're locking in supply chains. Canada's oil pivot. It's a lifeline. Russia and Iran's cheap crude? A wedge. EU's $300 billion threat? They're eyeing Canada's exports over ours. 2024 data shows Asia's GDP share at 35%. North America's shrinking to 27%. If this keeps up, the dollar's 60% reserve status could wobble. Borrowing costs spike. Debt balloons. Imagine a world where the U.S. isn't the default powerhouse. Trump's betting on leverage. Pause tariffs on Canada and Mexico for 30 days. Squeeze them on fentanyl. Borders. But what if they don't blink? Canada's $16.6 billion retaliation list is ready. Mexico's $3 billion too. EU's not joking with Boeing and Pharma. So is this a recession warning or a power shift? History's whispering Smoot-Hawley trade. Wars tanked us then. But today's world's faster. Meaner. China's GDP's 19% of global output. Ours is 24%. That gap's closing. So what's the play? Can the US muscle through? Or are we watching the board tilt east? Tell me your gut, because this could go either way.